Hello there, and thanks for joining me. I'm Corel Painter Master Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'm going to share a tip that'll help you get a little more control over how your thick paint blends with the layers underneath. Now it's pretty easy to get a dry paint effect. All you need to do is create a new thick paint layer, and if you paint on that layer, the paint's going to look as if it's breaking on top of dry paint. However, if you continue painting on top of thick paint that you already put down, you're going to get a more watery, oily, blendy effect. And again, if I create a new thick paint layer and I paint with that same brush and that same color, you can see I get very different results depending on whether or not the paint is dry or wet. And as you're working with these thick paint layers, it's not uncommon to convert one to a default layer so that you could do something like blend on it with a regular blender. But then what do you do if you want that blendy, smudgy, wet, thick paint effect after you've already converted that to a default layer and it's dry? Something kind of like this. Let's go ahead and take a look at how I'm doing it. I have my apple base layer here. This is just the base color of the apple. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to choose Select Layer Content and hide the selection with Control-Shift-H. That's going to ensure that I don't paint outside of my apple shape. I'm going to create a new thick paint layer. I'll go ahead and sample the color from my apple and make it a bit brighter, and I'll paint. And you can see I'm getting that dry paint effect because this is just a regular thick paint layer. Now if I paint on top of that thick paint, I'm getting that nice wet effect. However, if I paint off of that thick paint, then I'm getting the dry paint effect. So that's not the effect we want. I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. I'm going to create a new thick paint layer. And this time I'm going to select a neutral gray, which is 0 for the hue, 0 for the saturation, and 128 for the value. And I'm going to paint over my entire apple here. And this gray is a magic color because if you set your composite method of the layer to overlay, it's going to make that gray disappear. And we'll take a look at how to do that in just a second. I'm going to use light pressure just to remove some of this extra thick paint. And then I'm going to set the composite method to overlay, and that gray disappears. So now if we select something like a reddish color and make it a bit brighter, because this is an overlay layer, so we'll have to choose brighter colors, and we paint, and you can see that the paint I'm putting down is nice and oily, as if the paint underneath is still wet. Now, why is it working that way? Well, that's because we set the composite method of the layer to overlay, and on top of that layer, we already have thick paint put down. So we're painting wet on wet right now. We're just not seeing that gray because we have the layer set to overlay. Again, if I create a new thick paint layer and I paint with that exact same color, you can see that I'm getting a thick paint effect. And even if I pick a color that's much more similar, you can see the paint effect is much more opaque and much thicker. Now you may find that there's some colors that don't work very well with the overlay composite method. So let's take a look at what to do in that case. I'll just name this overlay layer overlay, and I'm going to delete the contents of this thick paint layer. I'm going to call this one screen. Let's go ahead and select black, and let's paint over our entire apple here. And let's set the composite method to screen. And screen makes black disappear, just like overlay makes gray disappear. So now if we want to select a lighter color here and paint, we get that nice wet oily effect with our paint. And it'll look just fine with lighter colors. We can build them up like this. And we can get a nice organic painterly effect. Again, if we create a new thick paint layer and we paint without applying that effect, you can see the paint is much thicker. So now what do we do if we want to work with a darker color? Well, then we're going to want to use the multiply composite method, and we'll just do the opposite of what we just did. Let's go ahead and select white, and we'll paint over our entire apple. And we'll set the composite method to multiply, and white disappears. Now if we select a darker color, and we go ahead and paint, you can see that we're getting that darker color, and it kind of glazes and blends in with wetness. Compared to if we create a new thick paint layer, and we paint, even if we use a similar color, we're still covering it up with opaque paint, and that might not be the effect that you want. Now the only downside to working this way is that you're going to have a lot of different layers that are different composite methods. And for example, if you try to merge layers that are different composite methods together, you're going to get unexpected results. Like for example here, my apple turned white with some purple. So to remedy this, what you want to do is just make sure you merge all of your layers together. So for example, I have this object here, which is the apple. I'll just merge all of these layers, including the base layer, and then it doesn't change at all, and everything's good. You can also wait till the end of your painting and just flatten all of your layers into a single layer at the very end. Otherwise, there's no harm in just keeping your layers separate. So there you go. I hope that tip has opened your eyes for a new way of working with the thick paint brushes in Corel Painter 2018. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to click the like button. And if you want to learn more about painting with the thick paint brushes, check out some of my Corel Painter courses at aaronrutten.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.